All right. Hi, everybody. We are really happy to welcome you. I'm Megan Sullivan here from Medfield Environment Action, as well as the Medfield Energy Committee. We are really happy to be bringing you this program to talk about a proposed warrant article that will be on the town meeting warrant in May on the 17th. Tonight's topic is about the net zero goal for Medfield. We're going to hear from Jim Nail and Hilly Passas of the Medfield Energy Committee. And then we are really delighted to have with us tonight Representative Denise Garlick, who's going to be talking about her perspective from the State House. So really welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. As you can probably see, this webinar is being recorded and we're live on Facebook. So welcome to all people in the audience. And we are going to try and run our program without answering any questions until we get to the end. We think we have a very comprehensive program for you, so we hope that most of them get answered. But if you have a technical question, you can pop it in the question and answer, and I will respond to that as soon as I can. If you have a question that occurs to you, you can also throw it in the question and answer spot, and we'll be happy to answer that when we're done. I will also at the end be doing questions and answers, and we can have some people actually speaking live to do that as well. So before we move on to our program, I just wanted to let you know that Thursday, May 6th at 7:30 p.m. we are going to have another recap webinar where we talk about both this article and community choice aggregation about a week and a half out from the town meeting. So if you have any questions lingering, we ask you to join that. Also, Medfield Environment Action has a meeting this Wednesday night. If you're interested in that, you can reply back to the email where you got your link today and join us. We will send you the link to the Zoom for Wednesday night. And then, of course, we are really asking everyone to come out and vote at town meeting on May 17th. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Jim Nail and let him walk you through. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Thanks for that introduction and thanks for setting this up. If you were here in those first few minutes, you saw these slides rotating, and what these show is that we're actually experiencing some of the effects of climate change and the accumulation of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, everything from, flooding to drought and fires and a range of impacts on human health. And the science is pretty clear that in order to avoid continuing or even worsening of these kinds of effects on the climate, that we need to pretty dramatically reduce carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade and then be essentially neutral by 2050. Now, that seems like a pretty big task, but Hilly, if you bring up the next slide here, sometimes the riskiest decisions you can make is to do nothing, as Richard Branson at Virgin says. And you can imagine that if we're seeing these kinds of effects now, that in the future, these could get worse. But if we want a better future, we need to create it ourselves, as Alan Kay says. And Massachusetts has been trying to create a better future since about 2008. That was the year the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed. And it set a goal of reducing our carbon emissions in the state by 25% versus what was emitted in 1990, and to reach that goal by 2020. We have actually hit that goal. So we've been very successful so far in, changing kind of the direction of the future. And so what the bill that just passed the legislature that I'll introduce Representative Garlick in a moment to talk more about is really setting that next set of goals. We set a goal in 2008, hit that 25% reduction in 2020. That's fantastic. We still need to do more. So what are we going to do, going forward? Delighted and honored that Representative Garlick has joined us here to talk about this bill, Senate Bill 9, an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy. And with that, Representative Garlick, let me turn it over to you. If you could give us a kind of a brief overview of the bill and how it came about.
Sure. So good evening to everyone, and I'm glad to be with you. I wanted to speak to you briefly about my role in the legislature and my activism around energy and the environment, and then about the bill itself. So I have been Medfield's representative elected in 2010 and began serving in 2011. So just about a decade now. In that time, what I brought to my life experiences was I'm a registered nurse with more than 4 decades standing on my feet at the bedside, and this tremendous interest and ability related to healthcare and the language of healthcare and the actions of healthcare with a vision for healthcare. What I learned about energy and the environment, I learned from my constituents and actively learned this is an issue that matters to many people in Medfield, in Dover, and in the town of Needham. The groups that I have worked with include certainly Green Needham in Needham is my hometown, but an interfaith group that was based in Needham itself with our interfaith groups. And then I also worked with an interfaith group that was based in Wellesley and had a catchment area of about 8 towns around. The UU Church in our town has a very strong social political focus on energy and the environment. And the League of Women Voters, that is now a catchment area and very active, probably one of the most active leagues in the Commonwealth. Left still standing in the Commonwealth, certainly. Very strong focus on energy and the environment. And so I worked with these groups and understood this, and now want you to know that although my natural language was healthcare, my acquired language is around energy and the environment. And it is a real language. You know, there are terms in it that I still wrestle to master and make sure that I understand. So, and when I did the representative report, when I introduced our discussion around this, the Massachusetts climate policy, it was the picture from your group with the shoes on the stairs of the UU Church that we put up. That was our way of alerting people to our discussion around this. So where did I appreciate, Jim, that you talked about 2008. So it's almost more than a decade of work that the legislature has put into this. This has a Senate bill number, but there is no bill that doesn't come through both chambers. And on my side of the State House, it was Chairman Tom Golden, who I have worked with for years on our climate and energy policy, and have brought constituents from the 3 towns that I represent to him to further those conversations. And like to think that we certainly weighed in on this in a meaningful way. So the next generation roadmap for the Massachusetts climate policy is the title of the bill. And you'll see here, there are 5 major components of it. One is the 2050 roadmap itself, calling for net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with 5-year interim targets. So Jim talked about the overall goal, but the 5-year interim targets make a real difference, because we don't want to get to 2050 and say, oh God, you know, we didn't go far enough, we didn't go fast enough. In fact, we're going to be able to measure our progress. The renewable portfolio standard, I know people that are listening to this understand what this is. It took me a while. Actually, this is an example of kind of wrapping my mind around this language, wrapping my mind around what this term meant, when people much more fluent in talking about climate and energy policy would throw around this word RPS, right? But it requires now the renewable portfolio. It requires that the utility companies have to purchase increasing amounts of renewable energy. This was really important. About 2 years, I believe it was 2 years ago, there was a disappointment in the climate and energy community and advocates and stakeholders that we hadn't done more work with the RPS. So now, in fact, we have increased it. The solar and wind, this is a hallmark now of the Massachusetts approach to energy and to our climate policy. Solar and wind, you may all know, in this legislation, we have reduced barriers. We have reduced barriers for low-income households to participate in this. We've called for additional 1,200 megawatts of offshore wind. But more than that, we have now seen a promise within the last week and a half from the Biden administration to fund solar and wind, and particularly on the East Coast. So this is not only do we have the policy now, but we also have the resources to move this forward. An important issue to me around climate and energy policy is around this workforce development. And I have found that when you're trying to discuss policy, that sometimes you have to find the door that works for people. So for some people, that RPS is their magic term, and that you're going to get their buy-in right there. And for people certainly down in the South Coast, solar and wind has been the language that they've been speaking. But I find people that are reticent to address energy and climate policy, you can oftentimes bring them into the discussion talking about workforce development. And Massachusetts has made the very strong case, and we have proven this case. We are the #1 clean energy state in the country with jobs, #1 in jobs, right? You can make the case to people that when we talk about climate and energy policy, people who are not thinking about this in terms of climate and energy, think about it in terms of money. And they're like, this will cost too much, it will take too long, this isn't going to be good for us, businesses are going to be hurt. And it's really useful to flip that conversation and talk about what workforce development could look like. So this bill provides $12 million annually for small businesses, to train small businesses, environmental justice communities, and fossil fuel workers. We want to take the workforce we currently have. We don't want to put them out of work. We want to transition them into the kind of work that we want to do on climate and energy. $12 million, it sounds like a lot of money for those of us that don't have $12 million. It's not actually enough money, I don't think, moving forward with this kind of plan. I think our real strength is going to be developing this workforce, being a leader, and people who are trained and who can do this work, and proving that climate and energy policy is good not only for climate and energy, but is good for the Commonwealth as well. And I did want to speak a little bit about this environmental justice communities. This is something, the 5th bullet here, that is very important to me and brought me back home to my roots around being a nurse. The way I first became interested in climate and energy policy was actually probably as early as the 80s. It wasn't my major focus, but I was a nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And at that time, the hospital wanted to build the big fossil fuel plant. And it was the first time that I can remember having that discussion about what the fossil fuel plant was going to mean to the neighborhood, to the immediate community. And I will tell you, the governor at the time, someone of whom I was a fan, although I wasn't politically active at the time, but understood that impact and made sure that when that fossil fuel plant was built, that the plume from that did not go over Brookline where he lived, but went over Roxbury, where there are very vulnerable populations. And then time has taught us of the increase in the amount of asthma that we saw in that community, and particularly in the children of that community. I've been asked to speak for about 8 minutes, and I'm always careful not to overstay my welcome, but I did want to do 2 things. I wanted to explain to you that the governor brought amendments. The House voted on this bill in July, negotiated it through the fall, voted on it again in the last days of the last session. And the governor vetoed the bill. He vetoed the bill. And the governor said that he vetoed the bill because the bill had come to him too late to be able to amend it. I think you could have accepted the bill and also talked about amendments, but the legislature was so strong and so deeply committed to this bill that we brought it up at the beginning of this brand new session, which is out of the usual sequence of how we do things. And I'm going to show you a schematic on this afterwards, but and did in fact deal with some of the information from the governor, rejected other amendments, and got this bill across the finish line. This is an example of some of the things. This is the process that I wanted to tell you, right?
Yeah.
So you see, we voted on it in July of 20, right? Then
If
the
I
Senate
may,
passes it.
Representative, if
Yeah.
I may, Representative Garlick, I know that not only did this go back and forth between the House and the Senate and the governor this year, this has been an idea that's been in the legislature for a couple of years. So I think the real question is sort of why now? You know, why did it get over the finish line? And again, with all this back and forth, what was it that you know, pushed it into actually being enacted?
So I'm just going to let you all hang on to that schematic. It's just mind-boggling.
It's just
to
typical
walk you through it. But
legislative activity. Yeah.
Let's talk about the why and not the what, right? This is the what here. So the why is that there's certain things you need to make legislation actually happen, right? This session, more than 6,000 bills have been filed, right? 6,500 and something bills, right? Of those bills, in the end, about 300 bills will be passed. Of those 300 bills that are passed, there's going to be a handful of them that actually really impact our lives, right? I think maybe we'll see 12 to 20 bills that are really going to impact the lives of people of the Commonwealth. Other bills have to do with local home rules, and they've got to do with municipalities and elections and those kind of things, right? So what is it? How do you get from 6,000 bills down to 12 to 20 to 30 bills that really impact our lives? And number one, why is that number so low? Well, that number is low because these are laws that impact everyone's life, 6 million people, right? You know, it takes a lot of work. On average, it takes 5 to 11 years to pass a bill. The reason it takes 5 to 11 years is you will never see me vote, and I have never voted in 10 years on bill language that is identical to the bill language that was filed. There's a process, and people in Medfield that do the rep report with me know this. There's a 13-step process as bills move through. Every bill by law, by the Constitution of Massachusetts, has to have a public hearing. We do the public hearings, you get a report, favorable, not favorable, sent to study. Favorable bills start to move forward, but they get what is called perfected as time goes on. There's hundreds of meetings that take place. The language changes. It gets negotiated between advocates and people who are not advocates. And that work happens over and over again. When we talk about the climate and energy bill, the stakes were so high on this, but the passion was equally as high. And when you talk about negotiating a bill, I certainly know for Chair Tom Golden, there was such intensity around this bill in the people who were opposed to it. When I talk about people who are opposed to this because they say it's going to be costly, absolutely. People were opposed to this bill because they said it was going to cost jobs. Absolutely, that was happening. You need, to actually pass a bill, you need to thread this needle, in my opinion. Now, this is just my experience, but you need the right policy, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, people like us that have worked hard and understand the importance of an issue, they think it's enough to be right, right? You got the right policy, it's enough to be right. It's never enough just to be right, right? You need the right policy. You need the people in place that understand this, that can really speak to it. It takes years to get enough people in the legislature to understand an issue that when you ask them, do they support, are they concerned about climate? They say yes. If you ask them, do you care about energy and climate policy? They'll say yes. You say to them, so let's talk net zero. Let's talk RPS. It takes a long time to get people up to speed on that, right? So that has to happen. You need the people. You need the right process. You know, that this schematic that I'm showing you, right? This is an absolute testimony to the legislature's commitment to getting this bill into law. How complicated this was, how much it took, superseding usual processes to get that there. So you need the right process as well. And you need all those things to happen in the right window of time. Yeah. We were finally in the right window of time with the language that we needed to pass this bill, the momentum from the advocates. And I would tell you that the Environmental League of Massachusetts was masterful in bringing people on board, masterful in sharing the language, masterful in not alienating people. And sometimes in an issue like climate and energy, because the passion is so high, people get divided into camps, into enemy camps, the people that are for it, the people who are against it, and they cease talking to each other. And I would tell you that ELM, the Environmental League of Massachusetts, it actually is doing a webinar on all of this in the next week and a half or so that you might want to join, was I think one of the most important players in bringing this bill across the finish line. And not because they didn't bully their way across. They advocated and taught their way across. They brought people on.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
Because that's, kind of the point of tonight's session, and what we'll be doing, after you finish, we're going to hope to educate and bring along other residents of Medfield. So I'm curious what the legislature's thinking was, once the bill was passed. What do they see as being the role for the towns of the Commonwealth and for the residents of the Commonwealth in actually getting us to that net zero 2050 and those interim goals along the way?
So I would tell you that I don't think the legislation is overly prescriptive, right? And when we say prescriptive, it would be like, all right, the town of Medfield, you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this. That our legislation isn't overly prescriptive like that. What the legislation does is sets the table. And in Massachusetts, we are thoughtful about not instituting a lot of mandates, but more incentivizing the actions that can be taken.
Yep.
Excuse me just for a minute. Yeah. So I'll tell you a secret. One of my dearest friends on earth is my black cat, and he's been gone for 2 days, and my husband just walked in the room with him. So I apologize. I apologize for interrupting, but that was a great moment for me. That was a great moment for me. But and for this legislation, what we do is we set the table. And I do believe, Jim, and I would actually defer to you on this, who I'm sure is looking at this very carefully and thinking about community involvement around the ways that we're incentivizing the work that needs to be done.
And I think, to the point of these quotes that we put up here, I think, there's all this talk about, the destruction and all the problems of climate change. But I think the flip side is that if we do this right, we do create this future where, cities will be, much more like the countryside. The air will be cleaner, they'll be more livable, and even economically. I love this quote from New Zealand's climate minister. As you were alluding to, there are jobs to be created. There's great economic activity to be spurred, again, if we do this right, with the right policies, with the right incentives.
And with the right timing, Jim.
And with the right
timing
timing.
is now. And I think we've only got one time to do it right.
Yeah.
We've only got one time.
Yeah, exactly. And, I stole this graphic from Governor Baker's decarbonization roadmap, but I think it says a lot of these same things where, the end result we're going to experience is cleaner air because there's less of this pollution from power plants and cars and all these other things, that actually our homes are going to be heated and cooled much more efficiently by some of these new technologies. Our vehicles will be cleaner and quieter, and the streets will be quieter. And again, the creation of jobs in solar, in wind, in other technologies that may come along, because of this. But that, and Denise, I really appreciate your point that the legislature is not being prescriptive, is not dictating what exactly each town will and won't do in order to achieve this goal. And that's kind of what we're here to discuss a bit. And I'm going to bring my colleague Hilly in here about, this conversation that we're going to have now for the next few minutes about, well, why does Medfield need a climate goal? If the state has one, don't we just have to do what the state tells us? But as you said, towns are different, have different needs, different concerns. But having a goal like this, my boss at my company calls it a big, hairy, audacious goal. Having a big, hairy, audacious goal is that first step to creating that future that we want and figuring out what's it going to take to get there. So Hilly,
Well, thank you,
show
Jim.
us what we're going to do.
Yes, so thank you, Jim. And I want to take people back visually into one of the earlier slides that showed how we already had a 25% reduction in carbon emissions in the state. And those 25% were largely achieved by the state itself. So the next step in the net zero goal that the state has really calls to action the towns and the residents of Massachusetts. And of course, if we set a goal, that means we can then envision the goal, we can envision the state, the steps that we need to take, and it's the first step in planning for the future. So why does Medfield specifically need a net zero goal and an action plan? I have listed here a number of reasons that detail that in more words, but the point is really that what was said earlier already, the modern technologies will save money. We can make a plan that's specific to the needs of Medfield. That means the sources of carbon emissions that we have, but also the kinds of needs that residents have in order to make the transition that is necessary. We can reach out to all the citizens and involve them, listen to them, advise them, gear them towards the resources that they need. And because it's local action, we're going to have local actors that will make themselves knowledgeable and help the residents of Medfield with their choices. And one of the large parts, of course, is the last one here, where it says grants, incentives, and rebates are available. Representative Garlick already indicated that the state is making a lot of resources available, and the volunteers in Medfield that are going to be trained or are already involved will make sure that the residents are aware of those and can make use of them. Another reason why we want to have a net zero goal for Medfield is that we know that Medfield residents support climate action. Representative Garlick already mentioned that she knows the same thing about Needham and Dover. And we have the results from a 2020 survey of Medfield residents where close to 90% supported climate action in some form or another. We had 504 respondents, which is quite a reasonable number of residents from our town. Medfield is lucky that we've already taken initial steps to reduce carbon emissions since 2008. In 2017, the town earned the Green Community designation, which meant we adopted the stretch code and had to institute some energy efficiency savings. The town, both in municipal, commercial, and private installations, has quite a few solar arrays. There is energy efficiency lighting that has been upgraded in town buildings and the street lighting. And private homes already have heat pumps in at least 57 homes, and there's quite a few electric vehicles on our roads. And we also know that there are more plans for solar installation. The new school building will be net zero, and the state hospital development is making some serious considerations about energy efficiency. I want to introduce now the net zero warrant article that we're putting forward, so that we can actually affirm the state goal for Medfield and make everybody aware that the state has the net zero goal and that we want to implement it locally as well. The first part of the net zero article is just a statement, a preamble that affirms that we know that greenhouse gas increase in the atmosphere has negatively impacted our climate and has caused some damage already, and that we want to mitigate that damage. The main body of the warrant article then affirms the state goal for Medfield, in that Medfield will try to achieve the 2050 or earlier goal of net zero, and will create an action plan so that this goal can be reached. And we are very lucky in Massachusetts that we already have a number of towns that have initiated this process. A lot of them have adopted climate goals for themselves to support the state action. They have created climate action plans that will outline how they're going to reach those climate goals. And many towns are, just like Medfield, have volunteer committees and groups that are dedicated to mitigating climate change and increasing the sustainability of their town and helping the residents make the transition to the new technologies. So the overall goal, Jim, are you taking over here again, or do I don't know if
yeah, I can jump in and we can chat a bit here together about this. Okay. Because when you look at these different goals and you look at what the state is trying to achieve, at a high level, it's kind of some very simple principles. First is reducing energy use as much as possible, which of course the Mass Save program, by improving insulation in buildings and things like that, has been doing for a number of years. But then the next important step is to electrify as much as possible, because electricity, as we move toward more solar and wind, will become lower and lower carbon. So over time, that will help reduce carbon emissions. But one of the things I think is very much part of the state plan is not to try to force this and get everybody to change everything tomorrow, but instead to look at those natural replacement points. When you buy your next car, consider an electric and see what's out there. When your heating system or your air conditioners die and need to be replaced, which happens every 15, 20 years or so, look for a new technology rather than simply replacing something very similar to your old technology. And by doing those things and focusing on, what are the areas that really have the big impact, and then what replacements and what new technologies are technically and economically practicable, that's what's going to get us to the goal. So we've been doing some work on that already. So Hilly, if you go to the next slide. With a group called the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is one of the groups Hilly alluded to a moment ago, that we can tap into these resources in the area to help us. They provide a spreadsheet where, and Hilly's done a ton of this work, where we can document what are the sources of emissions in Medfield. And I guess the good news here is there are two big areas to focus on. There's a lot of little areas, and you could get kind of distracted by those. But with the kind of goal that we're aiming for, we're really going to need to look at these areas of, the cars that we drive and our homes, and the electricity and oil and gas and things that we use in our homes. And so if we focus on those things, and that's, as we're at the very early stages of thinking about what this climate action plan might be for Medfield, how would we attack kind of these areas? So Hilly, go on to the next slide. I mean, there's quite frankly a lot of good news in terms of heating and cooling our homes. There's this technology maybe you've heard of called heat pumps and mini splits. There's a couple of different terms around there. As Representative Garlick said earlier, there's a bunch of lingo that it takes a while to learn. But these are essentially well-proven technologies. They're extremely common in Europe and Asia, and I think the dominant forms of heating and cooling homes, in those regions. And in fact, on the right here, you can see a heat pump that I just installed in my home this summer. So they're becoming more and more common in town. And on the left, the mini splits come from a couple of the other members of the Medfield Environment Action Group. So these are, they're not pie in the sky. They're not some futuristic thing. They're very realistic and very practical now, to the point that the Mass Save program provides, very generous rebates up to, as you can see here, $1,250 per ton. My unit there is a 3-ton unit, so I got $3,750 through the Mass Save program to help pay for the installation of that heat pump. So in terms of heating and cooling our homes, we've got tools and technologies and the knowledge to do that. Cars lagging a little bit, but they're coming. We've seen in the last few years, some states, particularly California, which has always been a leader in anti-pollution with cars and car mileage standards, they're looking toward electrifying their auto fleet. And as a result of that, and we're talking about it here in Massachusetts as well, but as a result of that, the major car companies, GM has committed to electrification of their fleet over the next 5 to 10 years. Volkswagen is just launched their ID4 model, which I love their positioning, the first electric SUV for everyone. These are cars that are not $50,000 and $75,000 and $100,000 Teslas. These are cars that any of us can afford and will be very, very practical for our use. So again, over the next few years, when you are next in the market for a car, look at these kinds of options. So overall, what we hope to achieve and the way we want to approach building this climate action plan for Medfield is, again, let's focus on those first 2 big sources of carbon emissions. Let's really, attack those things and see how much we can accomplish there. But, not trying to force this, not trying to, make this really expensive or unaffordable, but let's make this seamless. So when you're buying a new car, when you're upgrading your furnace or boiler, look at these new technologies. But we know there's a lot to learn, and I think Representative Garlick was dead right. It just takes time to understand some of these things and get comfortable with them. So on the Energy Committee and the Environment Action Group, we're looking at how can we build the kind of support systems, have these kinds of forums that will help educate people so they can understand these things and guide them to choosing these lower emission technologies when they're at that point of upgrade. And hey, you've got to spend a bunch of money anyway, so look for the better technologies, as well as, of course, understanding those incentives and rebates and things that are available from Mass Save or the state that help you get there. So with that, we come back to the real point of tonight's session. This is to educate you, to explain what we're trying to achieve with the warrant article for the Medfield Net Zero Climate Goal. We hope this has helped lay the foundation for that. We hope you will consider voting for this warrant article. And with that, we're certainly ready for any of your questions or any comments you might have about that. But I love this quote from Thomas Edison. I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle it. He couldn't foresee climate change, but I'm sure he would have said, I hope we can tackle this before the climate and the planet gets heated up too much. And I'll let you read the rest of the quotes. But please, if you have comments or questions, you can put them in the chat. And we are happy to take any and all of those questions or concerns you may have.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. We have an attendee with his hand up. Mr. Peterson, would you like to ask your question? All right.
I don't think I raised my hand, Megan.
Oh, well, do you have a question anyway?
Your hand is up.
Your hand is up. I will put it down unless you have a
I do have
comment.
after listening to Representative Garlick, I actually have a story that sort of flows out of what she was talking about.
Okay.
So back when Harvard and the hospitals were building that power plant you were talking about, Denise, my parents lived on Mission Hill, right next to Harvard. My dad was a professor at Harvard Medical School. And my mother had gotten very active in the neighborhood housing service in Mission Hill. And she was actually one of 10 taxpayers that sued Harvard University to stop them from putting in that power plant that generated electricity from diesel for the medical center. I found it abysmal that they did it, because they did it under a state statute that allowed them to clear the existing properties that were there as an area that needed rehabilitation. I think it's 121B or something like that. But it's an urban renewal type statute. And the properties that were there that they cleared were these exquisite old houses from 150 years ago or 100 years ago. They're some of the nicest houses on Mission Hill. And but it's hard to change Harvard's mind, I think. I think Hale Champion, who built it for Harvard, eventually agreed that he had made a mistake.
Well, Pete, I'd have to say it's no surprise to me that such a good son comes from such a good mother.
I always thought it was odd that she was suing Harvard and my dad was getting paid by Harvard.
Well, I think we just had that quote from Winston Churchill about sometimes you have to do what's necessary.
That's right.
Thank you. I don't see another question here, but I will ask one. Jim and Hilly, how much will this cost the town?
Well, right up front, it won't cost anything. Partly because we have so many volunteers that are willing to put their time in and have great support, both in the neighboring towns and statewide, to bring in resources that residents can use.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's, one of the points we made, because there are other towns that are a little bit ahead of us because of groups like the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I don't see us having to hire any consultants or anything to write a plan for us. I think we can, borrow elements from other towns. And again, because we know we need to focus on cars and homes, and there are programs like Mass Save out there, and there are, or at least have been in the past, state programs incentivizing electric vehicles. And again, with the Biden administration, there may be things coming. We see it more as a task of gathering all that information together, sharing it with the town, and as Hilly said before, even creating like coaches that will have like a lot of information and a lot of knowledge about this, so that when an individual is upgrading their heating system, and that can be a very complicated process, they can have trusted experts, fellow citizens in town here who can help them. So that's our plan of attack. We definitely want to make this low cost or no cost to the town to get started on this.
And I want to add, NATIC has had a climate goal a net zero climate goal since 2018, and they just finished publishing their draft climate action plan. If you want to see that on their website, it's a lovely, relatively short document of only 45 pages. Really well done. But it's there's really good precedent, and we can learn from a lot of our neighboring communities, which their carbon footprint, or where their carbon emission comes from, is very similar to ours. So the problems we have, or the issues we need to address, are exactly the same.
We have a hand up from Mr. Fisher, if you would like to ask your question.
I think you need to unmute.
How's that?
Great, perfect.
Is that good?
Great.
Okay. I just wanted to sort of disabuse the crowd of the notion that Teslas are very expensive. because I'm a proud Tesla owner.
Okay.
I enjoy, it's the most fun car I've ever owned. And it's also the cheapest car I've ever owned.
Right.
I mean, I bought it new. It's a beautiful car. People always come up to me and say, "Oh, how did you spend so much money on that car?" But it's less money than buying a Honda Accord.
Yeah.
You know, but
Okay. Great.
yeah, it's unbelievable. It's the best car I've ever owned in my 61 years.
Yeah. And
It's,
no oil changes, no tune-ups, right? So you're
no
saving
oil
money there.
changes, no tune-ups. It's, you know, the chart they give you, actually Tesla makes it very economical. They give you free charging for the first 2 years. And if you refer somebody else to buy a Tesla, which I've done a couple of times, you get more free charging. So I haven't paid for any fuel in like 3 years.
Great.
It's an amazing, this guy, Elon Musk, is a genius.
Yeah.
He really is. And I
Great.
think that, to your point, Jim, automobiles are probably the single largest problem for climate change.
Yeah.
And if we get electrification of the fleet across the board, I think we don't want to talk about Tesla's very expensive, because they're not.
Yeah, you have the Model 3 then?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have the lowest end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also want to drive home that there's going to be more and more choice in very short number of years. And, you know, that's for private vehicles. And on larger vehicles, there is a lot of research and already, you know, working models there for, you know, 800-mile 18-wheelers kind of thing. And
Right.
there's real progress being made very quickly.
Yeah, that's probably a good question for Representative Garlick about in the climate bill. Is there anything specific there about, you know, charging stations or, you know, incentives for that sort of thing, or is that something yet to be determined in follow-up regulation and implementation of the bill?
Jim, I'd have to get back with you with a very specific answer, but I have to tell you in general, I believe there was language around the charging stations and where they, you know, how many we would need and how they could be financed. And I apologize that I don't have the specific language in my head, but I remember being very struck that that infrastructure needed to be there and there was plans for it.
There's plans for it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's
Exactly.
that's definitely something where the town could probably seek some help as a town, possibly from the state, or I don't know what's coming federally too in that area.
Yeah, I know the Biden infrastructure plan does have a lot of money in there as well for charging stations and electric vehicle infrastructure. And David, to your point, I was talking with a friend recently who had driven down to Florida. I think he had to visit his mother or something, and he has a Tesla. And I said, well, how did that go? And, you know, were you able to get charges and all that sort of stuff? He said, I had no problem at all. And particularly with the Teslas, it's like when you see you're getting low on a charge, you punch it into the computer on board and it says, oh, here's the next charging station, you know, and gives you the directions to it, and you get a cup of coffee and you're charged up and then you're on your way.
Like I said, Elon Musk is a genius.
Yeah.
He really is.
Yeah.
Like him or not, he's really smart.
I think that's one of the fun things, if there can be fun things about this, is that I think there's just so much potential for innovation.
Right.
And if you look back, right, 30 years, nobody had a cell phone. We barely had an internet. And what if we just, you know, use that paradigm shift to think forward? What could this be? It's really exciting.
But having said that, you know, we really do want to stress that this technology is here today, and we really, you know, we really must, you know, change within the next 10 years. These are critical 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We're kind of like internet in 1995. You know, it's like it was there. It was just starting to hit the scene. People didn't quite understand it, but within a few years, it became just completely part of our lives. And you know, I think we're on that same sort of trajectory with a lot of these
EV.
energy technologies.
Yeah.
And David,
Yeah.
thank you for being an early adopter there and sharing your experience with us.
I'm very enthusiastic, and if anybody
Great.
wants to ask me about it, I'm happy to. I live here in Medfield on Stagecoach Road, and I'm happy to give anybody a ride.
Oh, I need one tomorrow to the back and forth to the car dealer. Thank you for your question. We have another question that was typed in. Representative Garlick, do you know if Dover or Needham have town climate goals?
So I know that Needham has an action plan that we're working on that was part of the work of Green Needham. And Dover, I believe, is beginning this work. Presently, Dover is very focused on the water issue, which is also part of climate and energy concern.
Thank you. And we have another question. Ms. Alford, would you like to speak?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
We
we
got
can.
you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, first of all, I want to thank Jim, Hilly, and Representative Garlick. Great talk tonight, and I learned something every time. It's sort of a question and also a comment. Jim had said something in one of the earlier slides about the impact on noise when we electrify as well. And I don't have a fully electric vehicle. I do have an electric plug-in hybrid. It's kind of killing me that in 2019 I didn't just go all the way, but they are so refreshingly quiet. And for any of us who have ever tried to sit out at Noon Hill or Starbucks and you hear the trucks and commercial vehicles going by, I really think the implications of noise pollution reduction, even with the landscapers, as we all work at home and deal with this. Do you have any comments on that or any thoughts? Because I think it'll have a nice impact.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, well, I've read some stories that, like in California, they've actually had to have some of the electric cars add some kind of sound creation because pedestrians can like just step off
Right.
the street in front of them because they don't know they're coming.
Yes, I was at a train station in Austria, and the electric engine started off, and they played a cello going.
Right.
It was very impressive.
Well, the other thing, just in at my home here, I have a Prius. I don't have a plug-in, just a regular Prius. But it starts when I start it up. It starts with just the battery, and so I can start it up when I can pull out of my garage, no problem. My wife hasn't gone that way yet, so she starts up her Subaru that's all gas, and it just spews the
Exactly.
emissions into the garage. In the garage, you got to like open the doors and let it air out for 10 minutes.
Right.
And that's just a very small microcosm of what we have with the hundreds of millions of vehicles on the road in this country. So you can imagine, again, the air being cleaner, things being quieter, and to David's point, fun to drive, comfortable cars. There's really not a lot of downside to this shift. It's always scary when something new comes and you got to change, but there's so many positives in this change potentially that we just need to get the word out and get people to embrace it.
And to Jackie's point that she regrets having bought this in 2019, I can relate to that. But it also talks to, these decisions we take for the next 10, 15 years. And we know that change is coming. It's going to come very quickly, both in, the availability of charging stations and the shift in attitude and the shift in, the price of carbon probably in some way or another. Yeah. And, the calculation just is going to change really quickly. So this is really, don't wait until, don't go the old way just because that's.
Well, that's my Prius is will be 8 years old this summer, and so I'm thinking about my next car. And I'm looking at some of these electrics, and they've got 250, 300 mile ranges now. When I bought this this one back in 2013. I was looking at the Chevy Volt. It was before they launched the Bolt. And I was looking at the plug-in Prius, but they only had like 25-mile ranges. So I thought, what's the big deal? But now, if you can get 200-300 miles on a charge, I commute into Cambridge in those days when we used to go into an office. So I could go most of the week on one charge. And there's even a charger in the garage at where I work. So the electrics are becoming much, much more practical than they were even a few years ago. So 2019, I don't blame you. It was probably kind of borderline in 2019.
Oh, I will. My husband knows. This car will be traded in within 2 years. I'm not waiting. But to the point though, I did not know about the apps. So you don't just. I have a family member with a Tesla S, and she said it's no problem. She's getting, I don't know, 350 miles on a charge for a newer one or something like that. But the apps, Boston has quite a bit of charging. We don't have it here in Medfield, but most people that have these cars have put the right plug in their own garage anyway, which I finally did. But thank you guys so much. This was great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you
And
for coming.
I'm thinking, this is a good point, Jackie, that we don't have public charging stations here. I actually think this would be a good idea for the economic development downtown, where people want to go to restaurants or attend services, and having that available, I think is going to make a difference in their choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jackie. There is a comment in the Q&A, which is an observation. Many of us with separate home heating and cooling systems can upgrade to a single heat pump system, where when we do that, we almost get 2 for the price of 1.
Right.
Does anybody have a comment on that?
That's exactly what happened to me when I showed you that heat pump. That was, the air conditioning compressor for the second floor of my house. It died in the summer of 2019. I managed to nurse it through the rest of the season, but it was not going to make it through 2020. So I did some research, did my homework, talked to Mass Save, I talked to 5 different contractors, and because it was the air conditioning system, I had the ductwork already in the house. So it's just a matter of take out the old compressor, pop in this thing called a heat pump, which is basically just a fancy air conditioning compressor anyway, and run the refrigerant lines up to the air handler. Goes, that feeds into the ducts. Very little difference in terms of sort of my day-to-day experience, and it's been great this winter. Home's been warm and comfortable. My electric bill is up a little bit, but my oil bill is down probably 15-20%. Check back with me in about a month when we're really through the heating season and I get my final fill. I'll run some numbers on it. But I think it's been a great investment. I can't wait. My boiler is coming up on 30 years old, so I can't wait till it dies, and I'll replace everything here with heat pumps.
Right, and just to take people's fear away, the current systems that people get installed here in Massachusetts and colder climates can go up to -13 or -15 Fahrenheit efficiently. So some people like to have a backup, like Jim was saying, the old gas heat, but for most of the time you can go do without. And to run it really efficiently, you will have like an external sensor to have a switch point where you go from the heat pump to your supplementary heating.
Thank you. We've been talking a lot about specifics about what individuals can do, but I'm just wondering, among our guests here, any thoughts about the article, what you heard tonight, if you think it's a good choice for Medfield? I should have gotten a poll ready, but I didn't. How about just unofficially, we could use the raise hands if people are supportive for just 15 seconds. And then we can then I'll ask everybody to put their hands down. So if you're supportive of the article and think it's a good idea for Medfield, you could raise your hand. And then if people, okay, let's see that happen. Oh, we're getting a lot of positive support. Excellent, looking very good. Does anybody who is among us have any questions or concerns about Medfield moving ahead? Because we'd love to answer those. So now I'll ask everybody to put their hands down. And then anybody who really has a question to raise their hand again. Let's see. So anyone have a question? All right. Well, looks like we have a lot of support for this article and not so many questions, which I guess is a good thing, right? I actually have a couple of new typed questions. Could we put the article back up on the screen? Could you share your screen? And then I have a comment. I'm very much in favor of passing this warrant article. Hopefully it will pass. Could those listening please pass it on to friends and neighbors? And then the question, what will happen after it passes, and how could somebody get involved in creating an action plan for Medfield? Thank you, Helen. Those are great questions, or comments and questions.
So I put this up for everybody. So what will happen is, the selectmen will ask probably the Energy Committee to think about making an action plan, and there's going to be a lot of community outreach. We're going to try and talk to people, find out where, what they need to learn, what are their concerns, and how can we help them overcome those concerns. And then, as Jim was saying, we will hopefully train some coaches that can do some hand-holding, guiding the decisions and helping the citizens to be informed about what the best solutions are for their problems.
Yeah, I think part of that that first step will be, we've laid out some initial ideas we have about what a plan would look like and what we think we would develop. We'd refine that, as Hilly said, through some of these public outreach and more meetings and things, but then get down to more specifics. Things like for example, oil heat has a much higher carbon emission than even gas does. So could we create some way within town to identify homes using oil heat whose boilers are, like mine, getting near the end of their life, and encourage those replacements early on? So we get down to a very fine level, I think, of finding those real pockets of potential and try to accelerate some of those kinds of things. But all of that will be part of the conversation we'll have with the town, assuming that the article passes this May, and as we set forth in the article, having this this plan by March of 2022. We'll have a lot of those kind of conversations, a lot of that thinking. That certainly the Energy Committee will be having, and I'm sure if people have expertise and would like to either volunteer as part of the committee, Fred Davis is our chairman. Reach out to him through the town website. The Energy Committee has a site there. Or if you don't necessarily want to join the committee, but if you feel like you have some interest and expertise in this, reach out to us, and we'll find a role you can play and help us.
Or indeed, if you have concerns that you want to have answered.
Great. Well, we have been together for a little bit over an hour, and I know we were trying to stick with an hour. So I think we should wrap up. Hilly, did you have something else?
Yes, I have another announcement. So Jim and I have been working together with George Whiting on advising the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee on the energy solutions. And there's a group at the UMass Clean Energy Extension, that a group of students that have put together a presentation next Tuesday, the 13th of April at 11 o'clock in the morning, They're going to present a sort of a model, a plan they have made for the State Hospital campus of what district energy would look like. It's one of the solutions that we think would really greatly improve the energy efficiency of the whole campus. And they have actually drilled down and are going to present to us what they think would work there.
Really, how about this? We will post it on the Medfield Environment Action Facebook page, how to reach us. And if you got your email tonight, that where you got your link for tonight's webinar, you can use that same link to reply if you're interested. And then we might send out something to our email list, but don't hesitate to reach out to us at meamedfield@gmail.com. Okay, so I'd really like to thank our panelists. Hilly and Jimmy did a great job. And of course, Denise Garlick, we were really honored to have you here tonight. Thank you for sharing all that great work you're doing at the State House. We appreciate it. Okay, everybody have a good night. Thank you.